Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the second video in this series. Just to recap, in the first video we talked about how to reduce the costs of merging on your property and how to create a robust team. So before we get going, we just want to thank everyone for the comments and the questions that we've received. It's created some good conversation. So what we're going to be talking about today is how do you actually train your team so they become robust. A couple things we want to talk about before that. Remember, we're really focusing on the type of merge that we're going to be focusing on today is that active assailant attack. And anytime this happens, it is always a surprise. It is a reactive response that's dictated by the actions of the suspect. But the key takeaway that we want you to remember with this is your team's ability to respond quickly is directly dependent on the preparation and the training that was completed before the chaos began. So let's talk about how you're going to train your team to respond. So we are going to break this down into two different kind of subheadings. First is going to be information-based training. The other will be skill-based training. So if we look at information-based training, which is where we learn concept, policies, procedures, it is usually conducted in a classroom setting, which always poses some challenges of bringing everybody in to a single point. You got to take into account shift work, keeping the facility still running while the training is going on. It can be challenging. But even a bigger challenge with information classroom style training is what researchers call the forgetting curve. Through research, they've shown that the majority of what students learn in a classroom setting is not retained. For example, with the average student, after an hour after they receive the training, they've forgotten about 56% of what they were told. We check back the next day, that's up to 66%, and finally a week later we're looking at about 75% of the information has been forgotten. So we're only looking at about 25% retention. But these same studies have showed if they get regular, what we call booster or refresher trainings, we can increase that retention rate up to 80%, 25 versus up to 80 through booster training. So what's our takeaway from that? For information retention, short, frequent training sessions will always be better than long, infrequent training sessions. So let's move on. Let's talk about skill-based training, hands-on. How is the majority of that training delivered? It's usually delivered in what we call a block and silo format. What do we mean by that? It is a single skill done in a repetitive, rote fashion that just focuses on that skill. Now, at the end of that training, the trainee can demonstrate that they learned how to do it. But it poses a couple challenges. For one, because it is done in a silo format, they have a hard time seeing how this specific skill fits into the big picture. They have a hard time putting it in context. Addition to that is it leads to poor long-term learning. If you go to that trainee a month from now and ask him to perform that task when he wasn't expecting it, chances are you're going to see a sharp drop-off in the performance from the end of that skill. So how do we train our folks? We want to do it in what we call random training. As opposed to doing one skill again and again, we're training multiple skills. And they're basically given a hypothetical situation, and we ask them, what do you think is the most important task? You've heard us say in training so many times, what's important now? This is building that mindset. So they have to think about the appropriate response. It's not a mindless response. They're thinking their way through the appropriate response. They choose a skill, and then they practice that skill in the subsequent skills. That having to think through the problem, it helps them see the big picture. And in done at regular intervals, this leads to superior long-term learning. So what's our takeaway from this? When conducting hands-on training, we have to make the trainee think about which is the appropriate skill and then practice that skill. They have to think about the response. Okay? And if we look at these both in a knowledge-based and in a hands-on skill-based training, why these are better, why we want to do them this way is because there's 4 key learning strategies that they draw off of. The first is what we call the spacing effect. As we've already said, training that is spaced out and done at regular intervals in short bites, small bites, will lead to improved retention. Next, what we call peer-to-peer explanations, whether we're working one-on-one with the trainee or working in a small group. The discussion of the appropriate response helps strengthen those fading memories, helps with memory retention. Next, that random concept training forces trainees to think about the appropriate response, which as well encodes that lesson more deeply, which aids in long-term learning. And finally, frequent practice tests boost long-term learning. They aid in stress inoculation because it's helping give them confidence they've been there before. And finally, it helps trainers identify areas where maybe specific trainees are deficient so we can give that remedial training. Now bear in mind, what we're talking about today does not eliminate the need for that full team, full-scale exercise that you conduct every year. That is essential. What these are doing is giving the building blocks to have each person be able to rise to the occasion. So in the final video that you'll be getting in a couple days, final email, in that one we're going to actually break down and in-depth discuss the 2 new services and tell you how they will help you create a robust team and reduce the cost of any emergency you might have on your property. Thanks, and be safe.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in again. We are really excited about this new training coming out, so be on the lookout for that 3rd and final email. What we're most excited about in the training is that it's going to allow you to continue to train your folks and improve your teams while still practicing social distancing and following the current guidelines. Again, if you have any feedback for us, please shoot me or Paul an email and we'll get right back to you. And we look forward to helping you with your team. Take care and be safe.